We live in a world more connected than ever before, where ideas, fears, and chaos now spread faster than facts. But how a country absorbs these global shifts depends on what's already broken inside. Today, we'll uncover 9 global trends shaping the future of every nation that are hitting Russia especially hard. From identity crisis to information wars, from dying communities to rising authoritarianism, these aren't just headlines. They are pressure points. I'm Elvira Bary, an author born in the USSR, and in this video I'll show you how these global forces are quietly transforming Russia forever, and why the ripple effects matter far beyond its borders. One of the most significant trends shaping our time is the crisis of male identity. Historically, the natural role of men in our species has been as breadwinners and protectors, with their success measured by the respect they earned from other men. In traditional societies, men belonging to the same group were constantly together, competing, communicating, and helping one another. However, industrialization and the rise of Soviet power disrupted this traditional way of life. First, men were sent to factories where they had little opportunity to distinguish themselves or show initiative. Secondly, their earnings were strictly limited by state-set wages, and the vast majority of Soviet men had no chance for career advancement. Third, the constant migration from villages to cities and from job to job broke apart traditional bonds, and many men lost the crucial sense of brotherhood and mutual respect. Additionally, all Soviet citizens lived in tiny rooms within communal apartments, often with unfriendly neighbors, leaving men with no private space to be alone or connect with other men. The result of this disruption was widespread alcoholism. Alcohol provided a temporary escape, allowing men to feel better for a short time. It also helped them interact with strangers. In a sense, Soviet men were seeking in beer bars what their ancestors once had naturally, simply through their way of life: self-respect, the ability to relax, a sense of self-worth, and the feeling of being needed. I have a separate video on why alcoholism was so prevalent among Russian men. Be sure to check it out. But alcohol led to the destruction of health and a different kind of catastrophe. Drunken men lost their value in the eyes of women. From other men, they longed for respect, and from women, they craved admiration. Even if a man does not drink, it's extremely difficult to win the admiration of modern women. In today's world, women no longer rely on men for physical survival, and the rise of social media and pop culture has created unrealistic expectations for romantic and personal fulfillment. Many women now expect perfection in multiple areas: finances, appearance, and relationships, leaving average men feeling inadequate and frustrated. This growing sense of alienation is leading to a rise in right-wing political movements where conservative ideologies offer an illusion of a return to a time when men felt respected and valued. This is a global trend, but in Russia it has become especially acute, particularly in poor rural areas and national outskirts. Phones are available to everyone. Everyone is connected to the internet, and women have a very clear idea of what the ideal man should be. If you are just an ordinary guy from a sunken bricks village, you have no chance of improving your life or status. Your only hope is to go to war, where you are very likely to die. Clearly, this trend won't change with the end of the war, because the money will run out and the population isn't exactly looking forward to the return of soldiers with post-traumatic stress disorder. In the past, governments could suppress dangerous ideas by controlling speech and restricting access to information. But with the rise of the internet, it has become impossible to fully censor inconvenient narratives. But savvy public relations experts have long found a way to deal with this problem. They began flooding the media space with dozens of conflicting narratives. Particularly impressive results were achieved when the issue was something complex that the average person did not really understand, such as what COVID-19 is and how to protect against it, whether or not to engage in global trade, how and where to save money, or what's happening in foreign politics. Additionally, online, everyone claims to be an expert, and it's very difficult for an outsider to figure out, does this confident, passionate person truly understand the subject? Do they genuinely want to share the truth, or are they just working for money? Since most people don't have the time or energy to thoroughly research everything, they simply leave the decision making to the authorities and adopt the position that we'll never know the full truth. A stark example of this is how Putin and his regime convinced much of the Russian population that they are Nazis in Ukraine, despite many Russians having family members or friends living there who could easily verify the truth. When speaking the truth is punishable, people avoid expressing their opinions, and only those with the power to speak out are heard. This creates the illusion that the whole country is aligned with the president. In reality, the dilemma looks like this. Do you support Vladimir Putin, or should we send you to prison for 10 years? As a result, the ability to make collective decisions and take action becomes extremely difficult because there is no common understanding of what is good and what is bad. For many centuries, European civilization adhered to the concept of the great chain of being. This hierarchical structure of existence placed God at the top, followed by angels, humans, animals, plants, and minerals. Every person had their place in this hierarchy, and their sacred duty was to fulfill the role assigned to them at birth, without challenging the existing order. If the lower ranks sought to rise, it would lead to rebellion, civil war, epidemics, and death. Under such a system, all power was seen as divine. If a ruler appeared out of place or did something wrong, it was expected that the people should simply endure. After all, the common person could do nothing to change it. The belief was that it was right to trust the ruler because they knew better. Until recently, this was true, as rulers had far better education and a broader worldview than peasants or craftsmen. Gradually, the press and especially the internet began to erode the perception of rulers as demigods. Leaders started giving interviews and even speaking on social media, which often seemed bizarre and left people bewildered. What he is even talking about? This is insane. Investigative journalists learned to uncover the elite's hidden bank accounts and expose corruption schemes, leading to a collapse in trust. In the US, the Watergate scandal was a turning point, revealing that those in power didn't behave like flawless gentlemen. In the USSR, the illusion of power was shattered not when Nicholas II abdicated, but during Yeltsin's rule, when his drunken antics and scandals were splashed across the press. People didn't know much about Nicholas because the country didn't read newspapers, but Yeltsin's decline was visible to all. Putin managed to seize power partly because he appeared to embody the right type of ruler, confident, athletic, educated, and multilingual. But over time, it became clear that Putin and his entourage were simply stealing resources from the country. Leading opposition figure Alexei Navalny and his team exposed intricate corruption schemes, revealing the dark side of Russian power. His videos gathered millions of views on YouTube, simultaneously shocking people and fostering a bitter realization that no one could be trusted. If someone rises to power, they will inevitably become corrupt. When Navalny was arrested and ultimately killed in prison for speaking the truth, it destroyed any remaining hope for higher justice. In the past, the government at least pretended to care about legality. Now, the rule is simple. The strong are always right. In this reality, smart people adapt, align themselves with the stronger force, and live like barnacles clinging to a shark. But trust is gone. There's no longer a sense that God's lieutenant is watching over you, knowing what's best. The ruler might not even have the necessary qualifications, or they might be looking out for their own interests, not yours. Over the last few decades, two fundamental shifts have reshaped our world, and not everyone has fully grasped their implications. First, politics and power were once incredibly distant from the average person. People had no say in international treaties, trade agreements, or development priorities. But the moment an ordinary person got their hands on a phone connected to the internet, they become participants in the political process. Millions of anonymous voices gathered in large groups, elevating those who spoke their values. Popularity became capital, a resource that easily converts into power. Additionally, these no-names started expressing their opinions, which, while often not supported by evidence, became a formidable force. A million unfounded opinions can be incredibly powerful. This power is easy to manipulate if you have the budget to promote a certain narrative or the means to silence dissenting voices. The second shift is that over the past few decades, a new class of technically skilled professionals has amassed great wealth. This includes both well-known billionaires and ordinary IT specialists earning more than the average worker. These individuals are confident in their expertise and believe they understand how the world works. Therefore, they believe they know how things should be run. But there is a problem. Standing in their way are millions of regular workers with smartphones who are easily manipulated if you know how to press the right buttons. But they don't necessarily see them as obstacles. Instead, they aim to keep them in check, occupying their minds with appealing narratives and ensuring they vote for the right way, whether in elections or in everyday life on social media. The issue with technocrats is that they oversimplify how society operates. Their approach is that of an engineer. They have 24 hours in a day, spend years building their careers, and have little interest or expertise in the humanities. Worse, they often disdain the humanities, believing that fields like anthropology, psychology, or sociology is worthless because they don't lead to making millions. This leads to a pattern. Technocrats believe they know best how to run the country. They manipulate public opinion to their advantage, assuming that this will lead to efficiency and progress. Their decisions ignore the findings of modern human and social sciences because they simply don't recognize the value in these fields. But they won't bother learning, as they already consider themselves smarter than everyone else. Technocrats are captivated by the future, by science fiction, and by the promises of what's to come. They want to rush into a new, perfect world and avoid dealing with social issues as they see them as trivial. When they gain power, they tackle these problems with force, driven by a desire to reach their goals faster. In Russia, we see the undeniable influence of technocrats. Yes, they make sure the machinery of government runs smoothly, but society as a whole feels the strain. After all, people are not just cogs in a machine speeding toward a bright future, nor are they fuel for that machine. Interestingly, the most technocratic concept of all is Stalinism, with its obsession with efficiency, scale, and progress. We all know where that led. If you are interested in more details, check out my novel, The Prince of the Soviets. It tells the story of a reporter working for a Western news agency in Stalin's Moscow, where foreign journalists took the place of the Russian aristocracy. The Bolshevik rulers may have gotten rid of counts and princes, but they still needed a royal court and an elite society of their own. Those who attended their grand events and interacted with administrative assistants saw much more than the average person, both in the West and the USSR. This is a captivating tale of how people tried to build a bright future, only to end up constructing something resembling the Incan Empire. Find the link to the novel in the description below. Every elite faces an age-old problem: how to prove to themselves and to others that they are special. At its core, it's a battle for attention and status. In the past, this was achieved with curly wigs, red heels, and white skirts that could barely fit through a door. However, the ability to buy expensive things on credit shattered the system. Now, a person with a moderate income can buy an expensive car and appear just as wealthy as the CEO of a major corporation. Do you know what many Russian immigrants buy first when they settle in America? A Tesla. They often live paycheck to paycheck, but they make sure to post nice photos for their friends and family on Instagram. By the way, Instagram is banned in Russia, but that doesn't stop everyone from using it. Ordinary people now have better access to food and education than their ancestors did, and in terms of appearance, the aristocracy no longer seems all that different from the middle class. The problem of flaunting wealth shifted to ideology and morality. Now, you need to show everyone how kind, generous, fair, and morally upright you are. You must stand up for the weak and the oppressed without actually doing anything, just talking about it. Declared sympathy immediately boosts your status and popularity. Sympathy must be displayed loudly, visibly, and the more visibly, the lower your status actually is. A famous actress can simply post on Instagram to demonstrate her sympathy. But for those lower on the social ladder, it only counts if it's backed by tangible actions. And that's when sympathy can turn into violence. Because what could be more impressive than doing good with your fists? In the United States, this manifested in riots by demonstrators fighting for all that is good against all that is bad. In Russia, the elite showed sympathy for Russians living in Ukraine, the Baltics, and other countries. A whole narrative of fighting against Russophobia emerged, a fear of Russians and Russian culture. The elite loudly expressed their sympathy, celebrated rallies around the flag, and happily watched their own fame and authority grow on the wave of nationalism. Meanwhile, those lower on the social ladder converted all of this into violence and went off to kill Ukrainians. When the Soviet Union collapsed, many believed history had come to an end. It was thought that from now on, all countries would become democracies, nations would live in harmony, and an era of global peace and prosperity would begin. In reality, what happened was quite different. Globalization led to the free movement of people, goods, and capital, and the global security system, largely funded by the US, allowed for international trade. However, in countries where wealth is generated not by innovation, but by natural resources or cheap labor, democracy never took hold. Local elites may have pretended to be democracies, holding elections and drafting fancy constitutions, but they had no intention of relinquishing their power or their sources of income. Democracy works well in places with diversified economies, where no single source of wealth dominates and no one can control it. But in countries where strategic locations allow elites to control trade routes, democracy struggles. These elites will make money from trade, use it to fund police, military, and bureaucracy, and ensure that no one challenges their control over the nation's wealth. All authoritarian regimes follow the same path. They suppress opposition. Democratic countries criticize them for it. And dictators view this as an attack on their sacred right to manage the riches they've won in a tough battle with political rivals. They then blame America and Western Europe for all their problems, using this as a rallying cry to unite the people around the flag. If there's enough money, the dictator can stay in power for decades. Eventually, thoughts of grandeur set in, and they may start a war, which is exactly what we are seeing in Russia and other similar countries. The problem with authoritarianism is this: democracies, for a time, find it beneficial to trade with authoritarian regimes because dictators can maintain favorable prices for raw materials by controlling everything in their countries. This means authoritarian regimes effectively get other countries addicted to their resources like a drug. So, authoritarianism strengthens at the expense of democracies, and then it attacks them. Democracies find it difficult to abandon such cooperation. Sometimes they have no alternative, and other times the alternative is just too costly. In the end, authoritarianism is the major issue of the 21st century. It's fundamentally against human nature because our species has existed for hundreds of thousands of years in small family groups with a hierarchy where the leaders' actions were always checked by how their inner circle regarded them. But with the rise of civilization, the system became distorted. The leader still focuses on their closest circle, but their decisions affect countless people they don't even know. This is unnatural for our species. No one should have so much power that they can wipe out the lives of others based on their mood without facing any consequences. Our birth rate is rapidly declining and the population is aging. I've discussed the causes of this in a separate video, which you can find in the description. Some people may think there's nothing wrong with this. After all, there are too many people in the world anyway. But in reality, the quality of life we have today is a direct result of having a large population. In the Middle Ages, humanity didn't develop much not because people were less intelligent, but simply because there weren't enough hands to do the work. The wealthiest and most influential countries were those with favorable geography and large populations. However, it's not just the number of people on the planet that has changed. The composition of the population has changed as well. 100 years ago, the average Soviet citizen was a 20-year-old young man. Today, that's a woman over 40. Soviet people used to be active, militant, and full of enthusiasm. Life was cheap, and the idea of dying for your country or for Stalin was quite appealing as it increased your social value. Today, Russians are only willing to go to war for a lot of money, and not even all of them. And nobody is willing to die for Putin. Just look at the rebellion by Prigozhin. His troops marched towards Moscow, and the population was posting memes and selfies on social media. The decline in birth rate has led to a significant shortage of workers, forcing businesses to bring in migrant labor. This is already changing the landscape of Russian cities. For example, in my youth, there were almost no people from Central Asia in my home city of Nizhny Novgorod. Now, they work in construction, cleaning, municipal services, retail delivery, and warehouses. The city simply cannot do without them. The fact that people are living much longer also puts an increased burden on the healthcare and pension systems. It would be fine if people lived longer in good health. But that's not the case. The government either has to constantly treat half the population or admit the failure of this system, allowing people to live out their days as best as they can, at their own expense. There's another aspect to long life. In the past, generational shifts happened quickly for natural reasons. But that's no longer the case. Young people now need to have a lot of skills and resources to compete with older generations and be considered suitable for starting a family. Moreover, wealth and power are concentrated in the hands of the elderly, and they are reluctant to share. The total wealth of society is increasing, but it's not reaching the younger generation. As a result, the younger generation feels suppressed, finding it increasingly difficult to strike out on their own and begin to build families. Trend number 7 gives rise to trend number 8, mass escapism. On one hand, life for nearly everyone on our planet is much more comfortable than it was a century ago. However, we now face far more fears, psychological issues, boredom, and concerns about self-fulfillment. Our expectations of ourselves have shifted dramatically. In the past, simply being able to provide for yourself and your family was enough to be considered successful. Today, Success is defined by the media and social networks, but reality makes it incredibly difficult to meet these standards. As a result, what we want and what we can achieve often no longer align. Life in the real world is becoming more challenging from a psychological standpoint, which is why many people are retreating into imaginary worlds, where life feels far more engaging and productive. This is changing our consumer behavior and altering the structure of our time. We are spending it on entirely different things. Our sexuality, birth rates, and crime rates are all decreasing. The reason for this is that people are seeking adventure not in the real world, but in their imaginations, on social media, or in virtual reality. In Russia, this trend looks like people wanting to escape the reality of increasing totalitarianism. The war affects everything, yet everyone acts as though nothing significant is happening. There is no talk of the war, and discussions about the future are non existent. Entertainment must be as far removed from reality as possible. Women binge watch melodramas and read romance novels about billionaires, while men play video games. There's another form of escapism. If you live in a desolate corner of the world with no chance of escaping poverty and misery, you might consider joining the army. In this case, death doesn't scare you as much as a life without prospects. New technologies are already transforming our world and will continue to do so at an even faster pace. Artificial intelligence is making work significantly easier, and robots are now performing surgeries. On the other side, our phones are already tracking us. I've long noticed that when I mention a product, related ads start appearing in my social media feed. People's movements are easily tracked, and their data is readily available. This isn't limited to government officials. In Russia, the government is building databases on everything, from food orders to airline tickets. These databases are available on the black market, often sold at lower prices by government employees. This has real consequences. For instance, I'm currently helping a fellow writer create a film about the war in Ukraine using AI. But we need real actors for voiceovers because AI-generated voices sound artificial. So far, we have not been able to find any professional Russian-speaking actors. Everyone is afraid of being tracked, blacklisted, and never working again in Russian cinema or television. I completely understand. For an actor, it could mean the end of their career. As a result, we may have to abandon the Russian part of the project and shoot everything in English instead. The war itself has become virtual and distant. The people launching rockets into peaceful Ukrainian cities are simply government employees living in large cities, riding public transport, and going to work. After killing someone else's children, they attend school concerts for their own kids. And they are fine with it because they see war as a video game. The Ukrainian and Western press report on missile strikes hitting residential buildings, but in the Russian media, nothing like this is shown. Information is available online, but it requires effort to find. And why look for it if it's uncomfortable? Despite all the progress, there is one area where new technologies have made little headway: mental health. It's not improving at all. A large number of people rely on antidepressants and other medications just to maintain control, and some lose that control. Among those making decisions that impact the world's future, many clearly need professional help for their mental health. If this video provided value for you, please consider subscribing. It truly helps the channel grow. If you'd like to support my work directly, you can click the join button, give a super thanks, or buy me a coffee using the link below. Every bit of support means a lot to me. I am grateful to have you here.